Hello everyone, it's Cathavinus. Excuse me for my recent absence lately. I've been busy editing videos for my priest to upload his own sermons on his channel. So if you are a Spanish speaker, please go check that out. The link will be in my description. I've also been busy translating two major works of mine, which are important feats for me, and they've been stacked on writing a commentary on the Alta Vendita. And then I've also been studying Henry Grenier's Thomistic philosophy and other topics like ecclesiology and contra Islam. Most principally, my school year and my prayer life have been cracking down on me, and I haven't been able to work much because of it. But I have many projects in the works to make up for my absence. Read my Medium articles if you haven't already. It will also be linked in the description. So that should give you an idea of what I have been up to. Thankfully, I am here to present to you a topic that I have been seeing recently on my Twitter around a few weeks ago. The problem being the universal peaceful acceptance argument. I have noticed this has been an argument used and presented against sedevacantism, and I looked into it a bit, and I'll be proving how this actually fails to debunk sedevacantism and even proves it, and how it cannot apply to us. Firstly, let me provide a brief overview on what universal peaceful acceptance is. But to shorten it, I'll simply abbreviate universal peaceful acceptance as UPA. So, UPA is basically the notion that if the entire church universally recognizes someone as the Pope, then by principle, such a person is the Pope, and it is an infallible act that he is a true and legitimate Pope. Cardinal Luis Billet explains that UPA is an infallible sign of such person being the true Pope. Novus Ordo apologists like to abuse Cardinal Billet and weaponize his thesis against us. Well, it's the end of sedevacantism, right? Well, not at all. In fact, if Novus Ordos had the literate capacity to read, they would see how Cardinals Billet and Cajetan bury their entire pseudo-church into the ground. So, the 29th thesis of Cardinal Billet, brief shout out to Novus Ordo Watch for translating this for the common people, reads as follows, quote, "Since title to the successor of Peter in the primacy of the entire church is legitimate election as bishop of Rome, one must bear in mind before everything else that, speaking at least according to rule, the conditions of this election depend on pontifical law alone. Moreover, in a person duly elected and elevated once and for all to the pontificate, power can in fact come to an end through voluntary abdication, but by no means through deposition, and indeed not in any manner whatsoever, if, according to the well-founded opinion of Bellarmine and other theologians, the case of the pontiff who ceased to be of the church on account of notorious heresy be supposed impossible. But whatever you still may think about the possibility of this hypothesis, at least one must necessarily admit that the peaceful adherence of the universal church will always be an infallible sign of the legitimacy of the person of the pontiff, and what is more, even of the existence of all conditions that are requisite for legitimacy itself." Unquote. At first glance, this may seem like it is over for the sedevacantists, but in reality, this is not the case. We know especially by canon law that the election of a pope depends on the consent and free will of the elected candidate. That is the first step to achieving UPA. Now, for us who hold to the thesis of Cassiciacum by Bishop de Laurier, we negate this because of the candidate accepts the heresies of Vatican II and cannot duly accept the election because of his acceptance of Vatican II blocks him from doing so. Therefore, UPA cannot apply to sedeprivationists if we negate the proper and necessary step required to satisfy UPA's criteria. Now, for my totalist viewers, I'll also demonstrate how UPA cannot apply to the totalist hypothesis either. First, Cardinal Billet, citing Cardinal Cajetan and Bellarmine, demonstrates the three ways in which a pope ends the human effects of his election. The first way is simply to resign. The second way is to be deposed by the cardinals or a general council. Thirdly is his defection from the church by the loss of the papacy automatically. It is common sense, and as Billet agrees, that someone who ceases to be the member of the church cannot continue existing as its visible head, in the same way that a Buddhist or a Mohammedan cannot be the head of the Catholic Church, the same can be said for heretics who cannot lead the Church because they are outside of it. Cardinal Billet gives an example. If the Pope were to become a Muslim, he would schism, and he'd defect from the Catholic Church and become outside the mystical body of Christ. It is worth mentioning that Cardinal Billet held to ipso facto deposition himself, which means that UPA can be a quality that can be lost. So to the people that subscribe to Billet's idea of UPA, you ended your career by cherry-picking your personal predisposition into Billet and leaving out what else he has said, and I'm talking to the Novus Ordos who say this. Furthermore, it is common sense that the Sedevacantists and the Novus Ordites do not belong to the same church. So maybe the Novus Ordos can believe they infallibly elected a pope, but they can't argue UPA against us because we're not in the same church, but because Sedevacantism holds the real Catholic faith, we have not universally accepted any post-Vatican II pope as a legitimate pope, and thus he cannot be a real pope. This further proves Sedevacantism, contrary to the purpose of the Novus Ordo, to use this argument to discredit us. A heretic or an apostate or a schismatic cannot be a true valid pope. Now some may argue, well, what about John the 23rd? He was an anti-pope, but originally accepted by the Catholic Church. Well, if you check my video on the analysis of the Cardinal Siri theory, you will see pictures and descriptions of John the 23rd being a Freemason and associating himself with them. Now, this takes us back to Pope Clement XII's decree on Freemasonry, around 20 years after Freemasonry was founded. He says, quote, "None, under any pretext or for any reason, shall dare to presume to enter, propagate, or support these aforesaid societies of liberi muratori, or francs-maçons, or however else they are called, or to receive them in their houses or dwellings, or to hide them, be enrolled among them, join to them, be present with them, give power or permission for them to meet elsewhere, to help them in any way, to give them in any way advice, encouragement, or support, either openly or in secret, directly or indirectly, on their own and through others, nor are they to urge others or tell them, incite or persuade them to be enrolled in such societies, or to be counted among their number, or to be present, or to assist them in any way, but they must stay completely clear of such societies, companies, assemblies, meetings, congregations, or conventicles, under pain of excommunication for all of the above-mentioned people, which is incurred by the very deed without any declaration being required." So, in other words, if anyone of any rank associates himself with any Freemason or any secret society of the like, they would face automatic excommunication according to Pope Clement XII. So John the 23rd automatically excommunicated himself when he involved himself with Freemasons even before he became the Pope, or quote-unquote the Pope. So he didn't accept his election by virtue of this. If not, he was never eligible for election to begin with because of the de sententia excommunication that he faced automatically. So he placed himself outside the church and thus cannot be its visible head. So to wrap it up, UPA does not debunk Sedevacantism. In fact, it only proves it. And as we have already shown, the reasons being is that 1. The Novus Ordo and Sedevacantism are completely different beliefs. They're completely different churches. So a Novus Ordo who tries arguing UPA cannot apply it to us because we're not in the same church. And secondly, as we have already demonstrated, and even the anti-popes themselves have subscribed to the Vatican II heresies, have rendered themselves schismatics, heretics, and apostates, which cannot be true popes according to the opinions of Bellarmine, Cajetan, even Billet, and even canon law. So UPA cannot apply to us in any way, shape, or form, at least if it comes from the Novus Ordo apologist. Thank you for watching.